On my 18th birthday, my parents told me they spent 95% of my trust fund on my sister's weddings. Hope you understand. So, I sued them and destroyed everything they built. Hey Reddit, my parents stole my future to fund my sister's fantasy weddings. When I found out, I didn't cry or beg. I built a case that destroyed their retirement, their house, and their precious reputation. They thought family meant I'd forgive them. They were wrong. Let me start from the beginning so you understand exactly how calculated this betrayal was. I'm Mary J. Roberts, 18 female. Got two older sisters, Victoria, 26, female, and Ashley, 24, female. Both of them are what you'd call high maintenance with a capital H. Think designer bags, expensive brunches, Instagram influencer wannabes who work part-time at boutiques while living off whoever's willing to fund their lifestyle. My parents, Robert and Linda, are what I'd call upper middle class wannabes. Dad's a regional sales manager for a medical supply company, pulls in about $120,000. Mom works part-time at a real estate office, maybe another $40,000. They live in this cookie-cutter suburb where everyone pretends to have more money than they actually do. You know the type. Leased luxury cars in every driveway, houses mortgaged to the ceiling, credit cards maxed out to maintain appearances. Growing up, the family dynamic was pretty straightforward. My sisters were the princesses who got everything, and I was the responsible one who was expected to figure things out on my own. Not because I was a girl or anything profound like that, just because I didn't demand attention the way they did. Victoria was the dramatic one. Every life event became a production that required the entire family's participation and financial support. Her high school graduation, Mom and Dad threw a party that cost more than most people's weddings. Her college graduation, same thing except bigger. When she got her real estate license after 3 tries, they celebrated like she'd passed the bar exam. Ashley was worse in some ways because she was sneaky about her manipulation. She'd cry at exactly the right moments, play the victim when things didn't go her way, and had this talent for making you feel guilty if you didn't give her what she wanted. Where Victoria demanded things loudly, Ashley extracted them through emotional warfare. Me. I learned early that the best strategy was staying under the radar, did well in school without making a big deal about it, worked part-time jobs starting at 15, mowing lawns, then busting tables at a local diner, eventually landing a gig at an auto parts store where I actually learned useful skills, saved every dollar I could because I'd watch my sisters blow through money like it grew on trees. By the time I hit 17, I had about $12,000 saved up from 3 years of work. Not bad for a high school kid. I was planning to use it for college expenses, maybe trade school if I decided to go that route. My grades were solid, not valedictorian material, but good enough for state schools with some scholarship potential. The thing is, I'd always known about my trust fund. My grandpa, Dad's father, had set it up when I was born. He'd been a mechanical engineer, worked for Boeing for 30 years, retired with a solid pension and good investments. When he passed away when I was 7, he left trust funds for all 3 of his grandkids, equal amounts managed by my parents until we turned 18. Nobody ever told me the exact amount, but I'd overheard conversations over the years that suggested it was substantial, enough for a solid 4-year degree at a decent school, maybe with some left over. I did the math in my head. If it was set up in the late 90s and had been growing for 18 years, even a modest initial investment would be worth something significant by now. My plan was simple. Graduate high school, work for a year to build up additional savings, then use the trust fund for a mechanical engineering degree at State. Follow in Grandpa's footsteps, maybe learn a trade first, HVAC or electrical work, so I'd have practical skills and a fallback income source while studying. I had spreadsheets, actual spreadsheets on my laptop, breaking down costs, potential scholarships, work study options. I'd researched which programs had the best job placement rates, which schools offered co-op programs with paid internships. This wasn't some vague dream. It was a detailed plan built on the assumption that the trust fund would cover tuition and living expenses. The only variable I couldn't control was the exact trust fund amount. But every time I'd asked about it, Mom and Dad would give me these vague reassurances about having plenty for college and nothing to worry about. I should have pushed harder, should have demanded exact numbers, but I trusted them. Stupid, right? My 18th birthday fell on a Saturday in June, about 2 weeks after high school graduation. No big party planned. That wasn't really my style. And honestly, after watching my sister's elaborate celebrations over the years, I preferred something low-key. Figured we'd do dinner at home, maybe go out for dessert, and then I'd finally get the trust fund details so I could start making concrete college plans. Instead, I got the conversation that changed everything. We were sitting in the dining room after dinner. Mom had made my favorite lasagna with garlic bread, which should have been my first warning sign. She only cooked elaborate meals when she was trying to soften bad news, but I was too focused on the trust fund conversation to notice the pattern. So, I said, pulling out my laptop, I've been doing research on college programs, wanted to go over some options with you guys and figure out the budget based on the trust fund amount. The silence that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds, but felt like 3 years. Dad cleared his throat. Mom suddenly became very interested in her water glass. That's when my stomach dropped. About that, Dad said slowly, we need to talk about your expectations regarding Grandpa's trust fund. Expectations, not plans. Expectations. Okay, I replied carefully. What about it? Mom jumped in with this fake, cheerful voice that made my skin crawl. Well, sweetie, you know your sisters both got married in the last few years. Beautiful weddings. Victoria's was at that gorgeous vineyard, and Ashley's was at the country club. Those were really important family milestones. I stared at her. What does that have to do with my trust fund? Dad took over. Those weddings were expensive, very expensive. And as parents, we wanted to give your sisters the best possible start to their marriages. Family is about supporting each other during important life events. My hands went cold. How expensive? Victoria's wedding cost about $85,000, Mom said, like she was discussing grocery bills. Ashley's was around $78,000. Plus, we helped them both with down payments on their condos. That was another $40,000 combined. I did the math instantly. $23,000 on weddings and condos for my sisters. And you paid for this? How? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. We had to make some difficult financial decisions, Dad said in his corporate voice. The trust funds were available resources, and we determined the best use of those resources was supporting your sisters during critical life transitions. You spent my trust fund on their weddings. Not just yours, Mom added quickly, like that made it better. We used portions of all 3 trust funds. It was fair. Everyone contributed to these important family events. Fair. They'd stolen from all 3 of us, but somehow that made it fair. How much is left? My voice sounded weird in my own ears. Flat? Distant? Dad pulled out a folder. He'd actually prepared paperwork for this conversation. Handed me a statement showing the current trust fund balance. $8,472. Out of what should have been around $180,000, based on what I'd overheard over the years, there was less than $9,000 remaining. They'd burned through 95% of my inheritance to fund my sister's Instagram-worthy weddings and starter condos. I know this isn't what you were expecting, Mom said gently, but family means making sacrifices for each other. Your sisters needed help at important times in their lives. When you get married someday, I'm sure they'll return the favor. When I get married, like that was even remotely the same thing as needing money for education, that would determine my entire career trajectory. Did they know? I asked. Victoria and Ashley, did they know you were spending my trust fund on their weddings? The pause told me everything. They knew it was family money, Dad said carefully. That's not what I asked. Did they specifically know you were taking it from my trust fund that Grandpa set up for my education? Mom's face did this thing where she tried to look sympathetic but just looked guilty. They might have been aware that we were reallocating some resources. They knew. My sisters knew they were spending my future on their wedding flowers and photographer packages and whatever else goes into an $85,000 wedding, and they didn't care. I closed my laptop very carefully, stood up, walked to my room, closed the door, and started planning. Not revenge. That's too emotional. Planning like an engineering problem. Identify the issue, gather data, determine solutions, execute with precision. First step was information. I needed to know exactly what had been done, when, and whether it was legal. The trust fund was set up by my grandfather with specific terms. Those terms had to be documented somewhere. Spent that night on my laptop researching trust law. Turns out when someone sets up a trust fund for a minor with specific purposes like education, the trustees, my parents, have legal obligations. They're called fiduciary duties. They can't just spend trust assets on whatever they feel like, even if they're the trustees. More importantly, if the trust specified it was for my education and they used it for my sister's weddings, that's called breach of fiduciary duty. It's not just wrong, it's legally actionable. I needed documentation. The original trust documents, bank statements showing when money was withdrawn and where it went, anything proving they'd violated the trust terms. Sunday morning, while my parents were at church, because apparently people who steal from their own kids' education fund still think they're good Christians, I went into Dad's home office. He kept everything organized in filing cabinets, color-coded folders, alphabetical system, the works. Dad was meticulous about paperwork, which was about to become his biggest mistake. Found the trust documents in a folder labeled Estate Robert Sr. That was Grandpa. The trust had been established in 1998 with an initial deposit of $50,000 per grandchild. Investment accounts, moderate risk, managed by a financial advisor until each grandchild turned 18. The terms were crystal clear. Funds to be used exclusively for post-secondary education expenses, including but not limited to tuition, fees, books, and reasonable living expenses while enrolled in an accredited educational institution. Exclusively for education, not weddings, not condo down payments, education. I took photos of every page with my phone. Then I found the bank statements for the trust account. My parents had been trustees with full access. Starting 3 years ago, there were massive withdrawals coinciding exactly with Victoria's wedding planning. Then 2 years ago, more huge withdrawals for Ashley's wedding. Documented everything, dates, amounts, patterns, built a timeline showing exactly when each withdrawal happened and cross-referencing it with my sister's wedding dates and social media posts about their condo purchases. Then I looked at my sister's trust accounts. Same pattern. They drained Victoria's and Ashley's funds too, then given them the money back as wedding gifts and down payment assistance. Classic money laundering through family accounts to hide what they were doing. But here's the thing. My sisters were adults when their funds were accessed. They could have objected, filed complaints, stopped the transfers. They didn't. They cooperated. That made them complicit. I had everything I needed. Clear terms stating the money was for education. Clear evidence it was spent on weddings. Clear documentation of when and how much. My parents had handed me a complete case because they were so confident I'd never challenge them. Monday morning, I called 5 law firms specializing in trust litigation. Got consultations scheduled for that week. Used some of my saved money to pay for initial meetings. The first lawyer I met with was this guy named Patterson. About 50, sharp suit, office downtown with law degrees from schools I couldn't afford. I laid out everything. The trust documents, the withdrawals, the timeline. He looked at the evidence for maybe 10 minutes, then leaned back in his chair and said 3 beautiful words. "This is actionable." "Actionable how?" I asked. "Your parents breached their fiduciary duty as trustees. The trust explicitly states funds are for education. They used it for weddings. That's textbook breach. You can sue for the full amount that should have been in your trust, plus damages." "How much are we talking?" He pulled out a calculator. Original deposit of $50,000 in 1998, conservatively invested over 18 years at even a modest 6% annual return. That's approximately $142,000. They left you $8,400, so roughly $134,000 in damages, plus potential punitive damages if we can prove knowing violation of trust terms. I sat there absorbing that number, $134,000. That's what they'd stolen. "What about my sisters?" I asked. "They benefited directly from this. Can they be held liable?" Patterson thought about it. Potentially, if we can prove they knew the source of the funds and knew it violated trust terms, they could be named as defendants or ordered to return the benefits. That gets complicated, though. "I want them included," I said. They knew. They have to have known. That will make this ugly, he warned. Family lawsuits always are, but going after siblings too. That's scorched earth. Good, I replied. That's exactly what I want. We spent another hour going over strategy. Patterson explained the process. File the lawsuit, serve my parents and potentially my sisters, discovery phase, where we'd compel them to produce all financial records, depositions where they'd have to answer questions under oath, and eventually trial if they didn't settle. Most of these cases settle, he said. Once the other side sees the evidence and realizes they're going to lose, they typically want to avoid the courtroom, especially in family matters where reputation is at stake. And if they don't settle, then we go to trial and I'm confident we'll win. The evidence is overwhelming. The question is whether your parents want to risk a public trial where all of this becomes court record. I hired him on the spot, paid a $5,000 retainer from my savings, worth every penny. Patterson moved fast. Within 2 weeks, he drafted the complaint and had my parents and sisters served with papers. The lawsuit named my parents as primary defendants for breach of fiduciary duty and my sisters as secondary defendants for unjust enrichment. My sisters were included because they directly benefited from the trust fund money. Even if they weren't trustees, they'd receive funds they knew weren't legally theirs. That made them liable to return those benefits. The moment they got served was apparently spectacular, according to Patterson, who heard it secondhand from the process server. Dad answered the door, saw the papers, and actually yelled, "Are you kidding me?" Loud enough that neighbors looked out their windows. I wasn't home when they got served, had strategically chosen to be at work. Figured that was safer than being present when they realized their youngest kid was suing them and her sisters for $134,000 plus damages. My phone started exploding around 3 p.m. Missed calls from Mom, Dad, Victoria, Ashley. Text messages ranging from angry to bewildered to outright hostile. Dad, we need to talk about this immediately. What you're doing is destroying this family. Mom, please call us. We can work this out. You don't need lawyers. We're your parents. Victoria, are you serious right now? You're suing me because Mom and Dad helped with my wedding. What is wrong with you? Ashley, I can't believe you're this selfish. This is going to ruin everything. Hope you're happy. I didn't respond to any of them. Patterson had been clear. Don't engage directly. All communication goes through attorneys now. Anything I said could be used in the lawsuit. Instead, I forwarded all the messages to Patterson. He seemed pleased. Good. They're panicking. Means they know they screwed up. The next few weeks were a masterclass in watching people realize they'd made a catastrophic mistake. My parents hired a lawyer, some guy Dad knew through his work contacts, not a trust litigation specialist, just a general practice attorney who was in way over his head. Their initial response to the lawsuit was basically, Mary is being unreasonable and vindictive. This is a family matter that should be resolved privately. The trust funds were used appropriately for family support. Patterson tore that apart in his counter-response, cited specific trust law, precedent cases, and pointed out that family support wasn't mentioned anywhere in the trust terms. The only allowable use was education. Weddings weren't education. Condo down payments weren't education. This wasn't ambiguous. Then came discovery, the phase where both sides have to hand over relevant documents. Patterson requested everything. All bank statements for the trust accounts, financial records showing where the money went, communications between my parents and sisters about using trust funds, everything. My parents tried to fight the discovery requests, claimed they were too broad, too invasive, violated privacy. The judge wasn't impressed, ordered them to produce everything within 30 days or face sanctions. That's when things started getting really interesting. Turns out my sisters had saved text message chains about the trust fund money. Victoria had texted Mom 2 months before her wedding. Talk to the venue. They need the final payment next week. Can you access Mary's trust fund for it? She's only 15. She won't even know. Ashley had similar messages. The condo down payment is $20,000. Can we use some of Mary's fund? I'll pay her back eventually. Promise. Eventually, right. These messages were time-stamped, dated, and showed clear knowledge that they were spending my money. Not just family money, my money specifically, and they didn't care because I was younger, wouldn't know, and probably wouldn't fight back. Patterson was thrilled when these came out in discovery. This is perfect. Proves knowledge, proves intent, proves they specifically knew they were depleting your trust fund. Your sisters just handed us their case. The depositions were scheduled for October. My parents had to sit in a conference room with Patterson and a court reporter and answer questions under oath. Lying would be perjury, so they had to tell the truth or risk criminal charges. I got to read the transcripts afterward. Dad spent 3 hours trying to justify his decisions, claiming he'd planned to replenish the trust fund before I turned 18, but unexpected expenses came up. When Patterson asked what expenses, Dad couldn't provide specifics, just vague references to market conditions and cash flow issues. Mom's deposition was worse. She cried through most of it, kept saying I was destroying the family over money, and that she thought I'd understand when I was older. Patterson pressed her on whether she understood the trust terms specified education only. She admitted she did. Then he asked why she violated those terms. She said she didn't think Mary would mind helping her sisters. Didn't think I'd mind. She spent $134,000 of my education fund and didn't think I'd mind. My sister's depositions were gold. Victoria tried playing victim, claiming she didn't really know where the money came from and thought it was just my parents being generous. Then Patterson showed her the text messages where she specifically asked them to use my trust fund. She went pale and stopped talking except to say, "I don't recall," to every question after that. Ashley went the opposite route. Defiant and entitled, said the money was family assets and everyone should contribute to important events like weddings. When Patterson pointed out the legal terms of the trust, she said those terms were outdated and Grandpa would have wanted the family to support each other. Patterson asked if she had any evidence Grandpa wanted his education trust fund used for weddings. She didn't. Asked if she'd ever considered paying back the money she knew came from my trust. She said she'd intended to eventually. Eventually, that word again. By December, my parents' lawyer was pushing hard for settlement talks. They couldn't win at trial. The evidence was overwhelming. The trust terms were clear, and my sister's text messages proved knowing misappropriation. Going to trial would mean all of this becoming public record, possibly news coverage, since it was a substantial amount, and definitely judgment against them. Patterson laid out their options in a meeting. They're proposing to repay the full trust amount, $134,000, over 5 years with 6% interest. Total payment would be around $155,000. They'd mortgage the house to get the initial payment, then monthly installments. And my sisters, I asked. They want to be released from the lawsuit. Your parents would take full responsibility. No, I said immediately. They knew what they were doing. They benefited directly. They stay in the suit. Patterson nodded like he'd expected that answer. The alternative is we go to trial, likely win, get a judgment that's legally enforceable but might be hard to collect depending on their assets. Plus, we can pursue your sisters for their share. What's the timeline? Trial would be spring, maybe March or April. If we win, and we will, you'd get a judgment for the full amount plus legal fees plus possible punitive damages. Could be $200,000 or more total. The money wasn't really the point anymore. It had stopped being about money around the time I saw those text messages where my sisters laughed about spending my trust fund. This was about consequences, about making sure they understood you can't just steal from people and expect no repercussions. We go to trial, I said. You're sure? Settlement would give you guaranteed money sooner. I'm sure. I want them in a courtroom explaining to a judge why they thought stealing my education fund was okay. Patterson smiled. All right then, let's go to war. The trial got scheduled for March. Both sides filed pretrial motions. My parents tried one last desperate move, a motion to dismiss claiming the statute of limitations had run out since I'd turned 18 in June and didn't file until August. The judge denied it. Statute of limitations started when I discovered the breach, not when I turned 18. Since I didn't find out about the extent of the theft until my birthday, the clock started then. Meanwhile, my life was moving forward. I'd used my own $12,000 in savings, plus that remaining $8,400 from the trust to start community college. Enrolled in a 2-year mechanical engineering technology program. Lived at home technically, since I hadn't moved out yet, but basically avoided my family completely. Moved into a friend's spare room in January. Paid $400 monthly rent. My parents tried to use that against me in the lawsuit, claiming I was abandoning family and being vindictive. Patterson shut that down hard. I was an adult. I could live where I wanted, and moving out after they stole my trust fund seemed pretty reasonable. I picked up a full-time evening shift at the auto parts store plus weekend work at a mechanic shop. Between the 2 jobs and full-time classes, I was pulling 60-hour weeks. Exhausting, but I needed the money. And honestly, staying busy kept me from thinking too much about the fact that I was suing my entire immediate family. My extended family started picking sides. Mom's parents, my maternal grandparents, called me in February asking me to drop the lawsuit, said I was tearing the family apart and making a mistake I'd regret. They offered to mediate, have a family meeting, work something out. I asked if they'd be willing to contribute the $134,000 my parents stole. They said that was different. That was between me and my parents. I said then we had nothing to discuss. They stopped calling after that. Dad's sister, my Aunt Janet, was actually supportive. She'd never liked how my parents spoiled my sisters, and she'd been close with Grandpa. When she heard what happened, she called to tell me she was sorry, that Grandpa would have been furious, and that I was doing the right thing. Your grandfather set up those trusts for a reason, she said. He wanted you kids to have educational opportunities he didn't have. Your parents disrespected his wishes and stole from you. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for holding them accountable. That phone call meant more than she probably realized. The trial started March 12th, 3 days scheduled, though Patterson thought we'd wrap in 2. Civil trial, so no jury, just Judge Harrison, a stern woman in her early 60s who'd been on the bench for 20 years and had a reputation for no nonsense. Day 1 was opening statements and beginning of evidence presentation. Patterson laid out the case methodically, showed the trust documents with clear terms, showed the bank statements with massive withdrawals, showed the timeline correlating withdrawals to my sister's weddings, showed the text messages proving knowledge and intent. My parents' attorney tried arguing that the trust terms were ambiguous, that post-secondary education could be interpreted broadly to include life education and family support. Judge Harrison actually interrupted him to ask if he was seriously arguing that a wedding was post-secondary education. He backtracked quickly. I had to testify. Patterson prepared me extensively. Answer questions directly. Don't get emotional. Stick to facts. Took the stand and walked through discovering the trust fund theft, my college plans that got derailed, how I'd had to completely restructure my life around my parents' betrayal. My parents' attorney tried to make me look vindictive during cross-examination, asked if I was doing this for money or to punish my family. I said I was doing it because they stole from me and I wanted what was legally mine. Asked if I understood families sometimes made difficult financial decisions. I said stealing wasn't a difficult decision, it was a crime. Day 2 was my parents' turn to testify. Dad tried to present himself as a father who'd made hard choices to support all his children. Patterson destroyed that narrative by showing Dad's own financial records. Luxury car leases, country club membership, expensive vacations. If money was so tight that he had to raid my trust fund, why was he spending $2,000 monthly on discretionary expenses? Dad couldn't answer that, just stammered about maintaining professional appearances and business networking. Mom's testimony was painful to watch. She cried on the stand, said she never meant to hurt me, thought she was doing what was best for the family. Patterson showed her the text messages where Victoria specifically asked to use my trust fund, asked Mom why she thought it was best for the family to steal from one child to give to another. I didn't think of it as stealing, Mom said. I thought of it as redistributing family resources. Did Mary consent to this redistribution? Patterson asked. She was a minor. She didn't need to consent. Did the trust documents require her consent? Silence. Did the trust documents authorize you to redistribute education funds to wedding expenses? Not specifically, but yes or no, Mrs. Roberts. Did the trust authorize wedding expenses? No. My sisters didn't testify. Their attorney advised them to invoke Fifth Amendment protection against self-incrimination. Meant anything they said could potentially be used against them in a criminal case if the DA decided to pursue fraud charges. Smart legally, but looked terrible in civil court. Judge Harrison asked their attorney directly, "Your clients are invoking Fifth Amendment rights in a civil trial regarding trust funds?" "Yes, Your Honor. They're concerned about potential criminal exposure." "Noted," she said, and the look on her face said everything about what she thought of that decision. Closing arguments on day 3. Patterson hammered home the clear evidence, explicit trust terms, documented violations, proven knowledge and intent, irreparable harm to my educational prospects. My parents' attorney tried to appeal to emotion, talking about families and forgiveness, and how money shouldn't destroy relationships. Judge Harrison announced she'd issue a written ruling within 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. kept going to classes, working my shifts, trying not to obsessively check my phone. Patterson called me on a Thursday afternoon. I was in my car between class and work. "We won," he said. "Full judgment, $134,000 in actual damages, $45,000 in punitive damages, $28,000 in legal fees. Total judgment of $27,000. I had to pull over. $27,000. The judge had awarded me everything we'd asked for, plus punitive damages to punish my parents for knowing violation of trust terms. Your sisters are jointly and severally liable for $89,000 of the judgment," Patterson continued, "the amount that directly benefited them through wedding expenses and down payments. Your parents are liable for the rest, plus all punitive damages and fees." What does that mean practically? Means they have to pay within 60 days, or we can start enforcement proceedings, wage garnishment, property liens, asset seizure. They'll probably have to sell the house. Your sisters will have to liquidate assets. This is going to hurt. Good, that's exactly what I wanted. The judgment hit my family like a financial nuclear bomb. My parents immediately filed for bankruptcy. Chapter 13, meaning they had to create a repayment plan. The bankruptcy trustee would take control of their assets, sell what needed to be sold, and distribute the proceeds to creditors. I was first in line as a judgment creditor. The house went up for sale within a month. Had to sell fast to pay the judgment. They'd bought it for $320,000 15 years ago. Still owed $180,000 on the mortgage. Sold for $385,000 in the hot ring market. After real estate fees and paying off the mortgage, they cleared about $185,000. From that, I got my $27,000 judgment, which meant they netted negative $22,000 from selling their house. They had to take out a personal loan for the remaining balance, plus moving expenses. They moved into a rental apartment, 2 bedrooms, about 900 square feet in a significantly worse part of town. Dad's luxury car got repossessed when he couldn't make payments. Mom's leased SUV went back to the dealer. They were driving a used Honda Civic that was older than I was. My sisters fought the judgment initially. Victoria filed a motion claiming she couldn't afford to pay, that it would cause undue hardship. The judge wasn't sympathetic, pointed out Victoria had a job, a condo that could be sold, assets that could be liquidated. The judgment stood. Ashley tried claiming she hadn't known the money was from my trust fund specifically, therefore shouldn't be liable. Patterson produced the text messages again. "Can we use some of Mary's fund?" Time-stamped and clear. That argument died fast. Both of them ended up selling their condos. Victoria's sold for a small profit. Ashley's broke even. They moved in together into a rental apartment, something I heard about through Aunt Janet. Apparently, they'd been fighting constantly, blaming each other for the lawsuit situation. Victoria's marriage was falling apart. Her husband Jake had never been particularly wealthy himself, worked in sales, made decent money, but nothing spectacular. When Victoria admitted they'd need to sell the condo, and she was liable for $44,500 in the judgment, he apparently lost it. They'd been planning to start a family, buy a bigger house. Now they were looking at years of debt repayment. Jake filed for divorce 4 months after the judgment, claimed Victoria had misrepresented her financial situation before marriage, and he felt betrayed. Ironic, really. Ashley's engagement fell apart even faster. Her fiancé, Brett, had been planning this elaborate wedding. Seemed to be a pattern in my family. When he found out Ashley was $44,500 in debt from a lawsuit over her previous wedding expenses, he called off the engagement entirely, said he couldn't marry someone with that kind of financial and legal baggage. My parents tried reaching out once after everything was finalized. Dad sent me an email. They had my email address from old family distribution lists. Long message about how I'd destroyed the family, how they hoped I was happy with myself, how I'd chosen money over relationships. I replied with one sentence, "You chose money over our relationship when you stole my trust fund. I just chose to get it back." Blocked their emails after that. Aunt Janet invited me to Thanksgiving that year. Said she'd understand if I didn't want to come, but her kids would love to see me. I went, spent the holiday with my aunt's family, her 2 kids who were younger than me, but treated me like the cool older cousin. Normal family stuff, food, football, nobody stealing anyone's trust fund. Found out later, my parents spent Thanksgiving alone in their apartment. My sisters had gone to their respective in-laws' families, neither wanting to deal with mom and dad's bitterness. Finished my 2-year degree, got a job as an engineering technician at a manufacturing company, started taking evening classes toward my bachelor's degree, paying as I went with no debt. The $27,000 judgment was mostly paid off by that point through the house sale and asset liquidation. Used some of the money to actually take a vacation, something I'd never really done growing up because we were saving money for important things. Went to Colorado, spent a week hiking and camping, met some people, saw some mountains, got altitude sickness, and threw up at 11,000 feet. Good times. Last I heard, Dad was working 2 jobs to pay off the personal loan and rebuilding his credit. Mom got fired from the real estate office. Apparently, hard to sell luxury houses when everyone knows you're dealing with bankruptcy and family lawsuits. She was working retail part-time. Victoria got remarried to some guy she met online. Moved to Texas. We're not in contact. Ashley ended up moving back in with my parents temporarily, then got a roommate situation working out. Also not in contact. Aunt Janet updates me occasionally when I ask. Your mother called crying last month, she told me around Christmas. Said she couldn't believe her own daughter destroyed their lives over money. Over money, I repeated. That's how she sees it. That's how she has to see it, Aunt Janet said. The alternative is admitting she stole from her child's future for Instagram photos and champagne toasts. That's too hard to face. She was right. My parents couldn't admit what they'd really done. Chosen their daughter's appearance of success over their daughter's actual future. Stolen from their youngest child to fund their oldest children's lifestyle fantasies. Violated their father's explicit wishes about education because weddings seemed more important. So they told themselves I destroyed the family over money. That I was vindictive and cold and chose dollars over relationships. Whatever helped them sleep at night. Meanwhile, I'm building the life they stole from me. Got a good job. Working toward my degree. No debt. Actual savings in the bank. Learning to trust people again slowly. Made some friends at work. Started dating someone I met through a hiking group. Normal life stuff. The trust fund was supposed to give me a head start. Instead, my parents turned it into a decade-long detour, but I got here anyway. Just took a little longer and required a lawsuit to make it happen. Sometimes people ask if I regret suing my family, if the money was worth losing my parents and sisters. They're asking the wrong question. I didn't lose my family by suing them. I lost my family when they stole from me, laughed about it in text messages, and expected me to smile and say it was fine. The lawsuit just made it official. My grandfather set up those trust funds because he understood something my parents never did. Education is the one investment that can't be taken away once you have it. Skills, knowledge, credentials, those belong to you permanently. My parents tried to steal that future from me. They failed. Sure, it cost them their house and their reputation and their relationship with their youngest child. But that wasn't my choice. That was the consequence of their choice to steal. I just made sure those consequences actually happened instead of getting swept under the rug, like everything else in my family. Some bridges are meant to be burned, especially when the people on the other side already doused them in gasoline and were looking for matches. They got their fairy tale weddings. I got my education fund back and the satisfaction of watching their fairy tale turn into a legal nightmare. Fair trade, if you ask me. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.